Please welcome to the stage Dr. Yanis Pavlosoglu, our speaker. Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Yanis Pavlosoglu, and hopefully I have an entertaining presentation for you over the course of the next 45 minutes or so. Glad to see such a good turnout on something that is a theoretical concept, a principle. And this is something that we stumbled upon during COVID. And it comes out of work that I think some of you also experienced during the COVID pandemic. So just before we dive into the details, a little bit, 30 seconds about me. So I'm one of those people that live and breathe cybersecurity, really passionate about it, good or bad, not sure yet, the jury's still out. And have served as CISO in both the financial sector and in government. Spend a lot of time on this concept of cyber risk engineering. So how to position best your people, processes, technology to face off to threats, both internal and external. So what are we going to go through today? A little bit of an intro around confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and how we're going to leave that behind and extend it, and why we're doing that, and who else has done that. We're going to look at the definition of the principle. We're going to compare it with need to know. We're going to go through an analysis of significant cyber incidents, and we're going to also look at the critique. So when does what I'm about to talk to you about does not work, does not apply, right? When you should not use it. I'm going to go through some examples to show that we didn't just invent this out of thin air, but it's out there, and we're just fortunate enough to name it together, and conclude with some ideas of future work. So a standard structure of introducing something novel here. Okay, so this is not the first time that an extension to what we know as the principles of information security is being proposed. An example, the Parkerian Hexad. It got proposed at the end of the 90s, actually. And not only do you have confidentiality, integrity, and availability, but you also have utility, possession or control, and authenticity. Dr. Parker, or Mr. Parker, proposed it. And frankly, we've been too busy dealing with the first three to get anywhere near, utility, right? And I think mainly we've been busy with confidentiality, right? But this slide serves a simple purpose to say it's not uncommon if you look for people who are working in our sector to be proposing new novel principles. And I think, frankly, we're going to continue seeing that evolution the more that we integrate with technologies and the more connected we become. Talk a little bit about what was happening in the early 90s and what's happening today. So back then, it was so much more about the physical, while now we are so much more about the hybrid and the virtual. We have virtual workspaces. A standard, clear desk policy has become a clear your desktop policy if you're wearing glasses, because the reflection might be giving away during a Zoom or whatever video call data back. That's far, far ahead of anything relating to the basic premise of the CIA triad when I was taught it as part of my CISP training exam, big book and 6-hour exam, probably showing my age. So things have changed, and we need to change with the times. That's our motivation at looking for new principles to simplify our lives. So let's look at some examples during this phase of soul searching and our motivation. If we look at what's happening in the space of DLP, data leakage prevention, or insider threat, we have algorithms that are governing our lives through probabilities. If we look at the insider threat detection algorithms, they're relying on examining behavior, user behavior. And they're also looking at the role, the data, and the level of access. In the same way that back in the 90s, as per the previous slide, if you went into an office at 3 a.m. and you walked out with a set of photocopies, stack of them, the security guard would be suspicious. Today, we have algorithms that are doing the same thing for us, just in a different construct. They're checking our email when email communication is leaving our firm, perhaps. They're looking at our behaviors, especially if we have insider or similar programs. So there is a space where already logic is being applied to extend this CIA triad construct, okay? That's our motivation for a new principle. We have evolved, and yet we're using something that is keeping us busy, and we need to evolve that with the time. Why add to the problem? As I said before, we have enough problems to deal with when it comes to solving the basic three, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Well, actually, we're trying to simplify our problem for the basic three principles. If we do this, as you'll see, we're going to prevent ransomware more successfully. And also, why are we having this conversation at a principle level? Why is this not just another control? Why is this not just another concept that we apply at a much more granular level? Very simple, because different organizations operate in different ways when it comes to how they have evolved over time. There's a different way as to how my company plans, executes, and delivers tasks, and your company does that. How your revenue streams are operating versus another organization. So for that reason, I need to present this novel idea to you at a principle level so that you can take it and customize it to your needs later. Okay, so hopefully you feel a little bit motivated being here discussing something new, and I'm not adding to your problems. Let's look at the definition. The principle of need to have available. I'm going to grab the podium here and remember my lecturing years. The surrendering of a role or permission that grants one or more users of systems access to data after confirming that access to this data is not required to complete the next set of tasks. Gosh, that's a mouthful. What is he on about? What is that? Okay, so let's look at that a little bit in detail and break it down. So we're talking about a principle, need to have available, where you give up your permission. Could be many permissions. You do that for specific systems. And you do it because in order for you to execute your next set of tasks, you don't need access to those systems. Okay? Now that means that we're going to have many discussions, and I'm going to have a lot of critique to share with you as to, well, can you always define your next set of tasks? And if so, how well do you know your data? And are you causing another type of risk there? So this is the definition. Let's look at what the description around this is. So this is a principle of confidentiality and availability, somewhere in the middle of those two, if you like. If you consider confidentiality, availability, and integrity as those Venn diagram circles that we had on the first slide, this is a principle of confidentiality and availability. It assumes that in order for you to complete at work your next set of tasks, you need a subset of the information at a data level that you totally have access for. And that's a bold statement, right? It doesn't apply to all roles. And we'll see that in more detail. And it also assumes, and here's the time dimension, that when you complete your set of tasks, you're going to surrender some permissions. There's going to be a reassessment of that. These are bold statements. If you consider annual attestation processes of access rights, right? If you consider how our policies are structured today, they don't have a time dimension in them. So That's the definition and a good description of the principle. Okay? Now, let's compare this to something that we all know and cherish, the principle of need to know. Well, effectively, we're discussing something that is an extension of the principle of need to know. We're not discussing something new that we just pulled out of thin air. The principle of need to know, the classic scenario, a user only has access for data that they require for their job function. Hooray. Yes, makes sense. Tick. In the world of the principle of need to have available, the user should only have access to data their job function requires for the next set of specific tasks. In fact, if you look at this table on the slide, most of the things that we have at the principle of need to know are further expanded by saying, and this is specific for the next set of tasks which are being performed. So that's the overhead that we're introducing. And if we look at the time dimension relating to this principle, in essence, we're asking information security practitioners to evolve with the time and go down to the level of looking at the granularity of access and data for specific slots of time. This is not a principle that you can just copy-paste the definition and put it in your information security policy and walk away. It's new, it's novel, and it has dimensions that we are not used to. Time is one of those. The granularity that it adds means that we accept that within our organization, roles and permissions are becoming more dynamic. Well, we experienced that during COVID. Just a quick poll here. Who in here during COVID was really cautious about how staff working remotely was VPNing into the organization and did not want them to have access to the entire network? Was that a concern? Hands up for those that it was. Right. Many hands are up. Yes, absolutely, right? So this is where this principle comes out of. Is there a time dimension, given that we can't restrict further the space access, and we're allowing a remote level of access that we didn't have before? We can't control that anymore. Once people are in, what can we do to make sure that the data is somehow restricted? First, the good news. So we have the definition. It's a theory. What happens if we try to, well, see how this theory would cope against, real incidents? So for this, what we did is we took the list of significant cyber incidents for 2021. And this is a data set that's open to anyone. You can just browse to the relevant table from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And basically, you have their definition of significant, which is something that has a financial impact of more than 1 million and is in the public record. It's in the public domain. So it doesn't have everything on the list, but it's a good benchmark. By the way, did you know that we don't have an open register in cyber and information security that has all the incidents that we are used to discussing? It's typically behind a vendor or an industry sector, an information sharing forum or something similar. So this was our data set. You can go and look at it. I think it served us well. Now, what was the analysis that was conducted? Well, let's look at the assumptions. We said, we have a principle, and had this principle been applied correctly ahead of time, would victims have surrendered their permissions? Yes, right? And so this is a precondition. So the surrendering was already using this principle, and there was a process whereby they were surrendering access rights, performing tasks, regaining access rights. okay? So it's a pre-assumption that this was working inside the organization. And I welcome your challenge on that, but we had to say what the benchmark is for our analysis. Our methodology was a two-stage review. Stage one, well, first of all, we took the first 101 significant incidents, and that's just an arbitrary number, right? We said, we'll take, that's a big enough data set to tell us whether or not this principle is of value. We said, okay, so two-step analysis. First step, for each incident, do we have enough information to be able to form an opinion about it? So is there enough information in the public domain, if you look up the information publicly available on that incident, that gives us some further detail to be able to opine on this? The opinion is specific as to whether or not, if we apply our new principle, there would be a better effect. So that's phase one, right? Second step of the analysis, simple second step, where we have confirmed that an incident is one that we have enough data about to be able to form an opinion. If the principle of need to have available was applied ahead of time, would this have limited the impact of the attack? And this has only three answers as a question. So we kept the analysis to the bare minimum, right? Either yes, no, or not applicable. So not applicable because we don't have enough information to opine, or we can't come to a decision, right? According to our two-stage review. Yes, meaning that if we had applied this principle, the impact would have been less. We're not trying to quantify how much less, just less. No, it wouldn't have made any difference. And here are the results. From the 101 incidents, 62% would have had a lesser impact had the organization applied this principle. That's big. Means that for more than half of the major significant incidents of last year, had we gone through this rigorous process and the time factors of the principle of need to have available, there would have been a lesser impact. So there is something here worth investigating. Also, please note, 23% no, and we'll look at why, and 15% not applicable. Okay, so we're just above the halfway mark. Let's look at the yes, first of all. So, classic cases where if the employees have less access to data, the principle of need to have available would have worked in our favor in terms of reducing the impact for the organization. Stealing a terabyte of data means that probably it would have been less in size. Now, it might have been the significant personal data that they got away with because they know what they're doing, but volume-wise, you would have a less volume to report in your data breach report, right? Debatable if that's important, right? But we have that. Smaller data sets mean also smaller data sets for ransomware to be encrypted, okay? And of course, where you have VPN vulnerabilities, or if you like, the outside hard perimeter of the organization failing, you would have an entry point for exploitation, but then a much more regimented set of getting to data sources within systems, right? Because everything would require further access to be granted. Finally, where we have cryptocurrencies that have been stolen, there would have been a further role required because, well, unless somebody's trading on a specific wallet address and so on, you would have taken that access right away from them because they wouldn't need it for the specifics of the set of tasks that they have upcoming. So that's the yes, that's the 62% with some examples. Let's look at the no. Well, if somebody has been in your network for 3 or 4 years and they've just been reconning and knowing what they're doing, and they already have domain controller access and they're already super admin, it wouldn't have made any difference, right? Because they're there for a significant period of time. So they would have seen each of your employees sample all their relative access rights, or they would have gone after your identity and management systems, backdoor that, and therefore it would be game over. So that's the no, right? That's the 23%. I would say a third, right? And even in this case, our principle is of value. Why? Because attackers would have had to work harder to get the data. So it wouldn't be just, I'm in, let me do some recon, let me figure out where the key data is, who's got the data access rights for that key data store. Okay, I need to become that user, go claim it. It would also be, and I need to time when I get that data with a person having, or at least one person having that relevant access right, or own the entire identity management system and solution, right? So as an attacker, you would have had to work far harder to get that data. So we were discussing the no's, and a key takeaway is that attackers would have had to work harder. The question that I asked was around whether or not people involved with red team exercises, which are time-bound, basically would have to factor this in. So how well would attackers have to work in order to be able to get to that data? Well, that's the good news. Let's look at also when this principle does not work. So a few examples of critique. First critique. Not all tasks in a modern work environment are equal. Not everything can be premeditated. Yes, you will have functions like IT ops or DevSecOps or similar environments where things can be prescribed. But if you look at what we have in a modern workforce, not all tasks are performed linearly. They can't be premeditated. And also within a modern workforce, the principle cannot be applied at all roles and ranks. Imagine trying to apply the principle of need to have available to your CEO. Just won't work, right? Much more dynamic. So that's one critique. It wouldn't work there. And this goes back to my statement around this is not something to copy-paste and put in your policy. It requires a little bit more work because of that time factor. Second critique. This can stifle innovation. The way that we work typically involves us having a brain aha moment and combining a data set with another data set, or asking to collaborate with people outside of the execution of specific paths. We cannot simply assume that the entire organization works like that. And this doesn't just only go to innovation teams or teams relating to basically non-transactional activities. This is how we are wired as people when executing work. That's when we have the aha moment or moments. Having said that, we can still promote innovation and identify those phases of brainstorming and then create data pools, which is a common practice when, for example, senior management have strategy meetings. There is just a data pool of previous strategies, previous revenues, previous data involving what the organization is doing at a board level. So already they are using a version of this principle. We just haven't called it that. But please remember, it can stifle innovation. Third critique. Well, this might sound obvious, but how many times we as cybersecurity professionals have actually brought out something that's an issue within the organization, even though we're working in cybersecurity, right? It happens quite often. We bubble things up. And it might sound basic, but users need to know their tasks. Not everyone potentially understands what it is that their task relates to, right? This might come as a surprise. Also, the surrendering of a role can put the completion of a task at risk. You're effectively creating a mini denial of service attack for those employees that are either lazy, immature, or don't understand what data they need in order to be able to progress. And you'll be held accountable for that, even though you're trying to do it for very good reason, to prevent the attacks that we discussed, right? So some solution to this is, well, before applying the principle, ensure that the employees in question understand their data. Might sound basic, but this is a consultation request. You'd have to summon people in rooms and tell them why they are remote, why when they are remote, they don't have the same level of access to the systems as to when they're in the office. And you're going to have to deal with questions around, are you actually making our lives more difficult? Why are you doing this? Et cetera, et cetera. So that's something to bear in mind before applying the principle of need to have available. Well, let's just summarize these critiques, right? We're introducing something new. It involves a time factor, and with timeless permissions over data, which is what we're used to, comes the responsibility of knowing the value of that data. And beforehand, because we had the physical environment of the organization, that was quite easy to have. When you're limiting data access, you need to also know and be aware of what can go wrong at an employee or at a data level. And perhaps this is something that was tolerated during COVID because everyone was in, panic mode in the context of making sure that there's business continuity. So people were listening to us as cyber and information security professionals a little bit more. Does this outweigh the reward? I don't know. I'm putting it out there. All we're doing is identifying this principle for you. So that's the summary of the critique. Now, we've found something new. We looked at it. Let's dive into some examples. And what better way to dive in than the predominant attack that we see, unfortunately, still with major cyber incidents costing more than 1 million, which is ransomware. Ransomware impact would be minimized further by default if the principle of need to have available is applied. You can see why that is, because the encryption payload comes in and it delivers some sort of first stage malware, and then second stage payload comes in, starts encrypting the data for the user, off it goes to look for other data sources, and all of a sudden, the other data sources are not accessible, or at least not all of them. Why? Because the user has surrendered their access rights. Why? Because they don't need all their access rights for the next set of premeditated tasks. With access rights revoked, permissions would limit where the payload could access and search for data to encrypt. That's a big deal. We don't have that today. We only have it in the form of specific technologies that limit access for administrators, perhaps. We have it for stores that we have as offline storage. But already to be saying that there is a process, please notice, this is a process that is supported by a principle whereby the impact of ransomware is going to be reduced, that's a really big deal. Okay, so maybe some of the trade-offs and the critique are worth a while. Whenever we stumble across areas where we've had something that we think is new and something that's worth our while, it's worth looking at examples of where this might be already being applied. And one place that we focused on was ERP systems, enterprise resource planning systems. Why? Because enterprise resource planning systems are typically policy-based and they give granular permissions. Plus, the permissions are typically tied to some business activity that is often time-bound. Let's say that you have, for example, ERP systems that involve some sort of contractual agreement between two companies. Just one example. What the ERP system is trying to do is streamline how business executes and also provide that granular level of access where necessary. So, already ERP systems are a good candidate for us to test whether or not our principle exists in this space. They have granular permissions, they're there to simplify, they typically talk business speak, they have policies, and frankly, it's a whole market out there. Microsoft is in this space, Oracle, SAP, et cetera, et cetera. We're all familiar with such software. So let's look at a real-world example with what is often referred to in the ERP space as need to share. Need to share is where organizations must share data externally with other organizations. This is a more generic instance of the principle of need to have available. Effectively, where access is granted based on how data is going to be further shared. If the people responsible for sharing the information further do not have a task to do something with that information, you can just revoke their permission. So already in ERP, this thing that is called, in ERP terminology of policies, this thing that is called need to share is a more generic instance of what we just talked about, the principle of need to have available. It's already being used, it just has a different name. Brilliant, right? Let's look at another example, trust policies within organizations. So this is where data is only shared between specific organizations. Briefly mentioned it before, but let's look at it in detail. So here we have two organizations, different legal entities, perhaps different jurisdictions, different countries, that need to share data to work, for example, on a specific RFP, a common deal, right? But they are separate organizations and they have separate reporting lines. So we don't want to give the other organization more information that they need, and we also don't want to receive more information than we should, because we might be liable contractually later on as to how we've used or not that information. This is a trust policy in ERP terminology. And here you have the principle of need to have available at a contractual level being applied. So typically there is an NDA or a contract or something that involves the two organizations agreeing to work together on the specific output that relates to them combining forces for that activity, and it's time-bound. It has a date by which it ends. Need to have available is being applied here. It's just a different level of application. It's organization to organization, right? So another place where we are seeing a real-world example of need to have available being applied today, trust policies between organizations in ERP systems. Final example that I have for you is integrity policies. So imagine that you have specific data that is super sensitive, and when it comes to editing that data, updating it, writing to specific databases, etc., there is a separate access right. In the ERP world, we call this integrity. And this is more widely, and integrity is a bigger topic, that's why I'm saying in the ERP world. So an integrity in the ERP world typically comes with an integrity policy. So far, so good, right? Well, an integrity policy is already the principle of need to have available being applied in the context of revoking the right permission because it's not required. So again, we already see an application of the principle of need to have available in this granular world of read-write permissions in ERP systems. All right, so let's conclude. Let's wrap up this whole novel idea and conclude. What is it that we've seen here? We've seen something that has come out of COVID. And because of the change of how we basically used to go in the office, we used to have a physical presence in some environment to do our work. We had a set of principles, and we still have those. The question is, now that we're remote, how do these principles need to evolve? So that's our motivation. That's why we're doing all this. That's where this came out of. We didn't just think of it out of thin air. Then the question is, well, okay, we understand the motivation, but what does this principle look like and how do we apply it? And this is about what do we gain from it as well? Well, we apply it by introducing the time dimension that we talked about on a set of premeditated tasks, and we also need to have the ability within our organization to revoke permissions. Not revoke them and wait 24 hours, something a little bit more dynamic. And maybe your organization, my organization, doesn't have that capability. Maybe we're not ready for this. But if you do have this time dimension, then need to have available pays off. It offers some good things. First of all, it gives you the ability to limit the impact of what we've seen as significant incidents from last year. And it gives you the ability to also restrict what the predominant type of attacks that we're all struggling with, ransomware, is able to access and encrypt. Is it perfect? No, because it relies on basically a little bit of luck when you get hit by ransomware, the person or persons in question not having the access rights that are going to hurt you the most for the data that they encrypt. But it is an additional layer of protection, and it's a good layer. Number 4, for the principle to work, we must be able to have a set of premeditated tasks. So we need to be able to plan. Maybe we can't plan everything, so there's a set of preconditions. And we also need to have an understanding of the data that is required to complete those tasks. So we're relying on a skilled workforce. Okay, on paper, we're all skilled workers, right? But how far does that go? And think of some of the legacy applications, perhaps, that you might have within your organizations. Finally, if you look at an idea like this, it needs further work. And this is where I encourage you to participate, and also, if you're happy to contribute, I'd welcome that. And the participation is very specific. We now have a principle, we have something that's worthy of including at a policy level as an update, as an evolution to what we do in our information security policy or similar documents, but we don't have enough data or analysis at the implementation level. I still have only 2 playbooks in this space where I can give you real data of process step by step of what to do and how to apply the principle of need to have available. So that's an important area. If you're thinking of contributing, if you like what you've heard today, it's something that is ongoing work and is really an area where I'd welcome your help in this space. Just to conclude with a final thought. It's not every day that you get to introduce something as novel and as good as this. And I can't claim the credit for it. Genuinely, we stumbled upon it during COVID in a way that we were trying to restrict access where access was not needed. But it turns out that it's a solid idea. That's what it looks like now. I've written about it in peer-reviewed journals. It's been keynoted at conferences. It's here now being discussed. So I think there's something here that is worth exploring for the future of our industry. And I welcome all the critique, and you see how honest we've been with our critique on the principle. If that's true, if there is something here, please go and try to apply this and see if it has legs within your organization. And I'd love to hear back from you, whether it's good news or bad news. I haven't attached my ego to anything relating to this principle. Thus far, we're receiving good feedback on it. It's hard to implement, we're being told, but for teams that are structured, know their data, know what they're doing, it works, right? And of course, if you have the time and you want to contribute, I'd welcome implementation guides, and I'll be more than happy to work with you on that. And with that, I'd like to thank you and take any questions.
Great. Perfect. So first we'll take a question from the room.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a very intriguing idea. And I wondered if you have played with voluntary implementation with a user. For example, I could see, in my open Outlook in the morning, an assessment of my task for the day, and that I'm asked, would you like these resources made available to you? And it would make these files available, these applications available, then everything else would be restricted for that period of time while I was working on those tasks. And that's something I would agree to. I'd find it liberating, actually, because I wouldn't, it would be, I'd feel like I could work without worrying about necessarily having access to some other resources. So this is one idea.
Thank you. No, absolutely. And I very much agree with your statement. In fact, in the Microsoft world, and we all kind of live in the Microsoft world when it comes to our tasks, right? You could automate this. And we've done a little bit of that. Just because you brought up Outlook as an example, to continue on that example, in the personal space, if you have a OneDrive, it has a personal vault. And the personal vault locks and unlocks over a period of time. That's this principle, right? So again, it's not called that, but they have already automated it, and we're just identifying that it's there. Thank you for that.
Thank you. The next question from online is, this kind of sounds like just-in-time access. How does it compare?
Just-in-time access is very similar to this, but it doesn't have the necessary interaction when it comes to premeditated tasks for the workforce. So I would say this is just-in-time access plus plus, because it requires a certain level of maturity within the organization in order for it to be applied. Where did we go wrong with just-in-time access? We didn't do the communication part. We didn't go to a team and say, you know, it's okay if you're just working in firefighting mode and we're not going to apply just-in-time access, right? And that's where I think we lost a little bit of the battle there. But I would say it's just the next iteration or version of it in a less technical, more consultative way.
Thank you for that. Any questions in the room? Okay, perfect.
Early on, you admitted that there's high overhead, let's say administratively, to give back, re-get access. I don't think that's trivial at all. Are you going to make this all automated so it never has to be approved? I mean, you wait so long to get the access you need to do a variety of jobs, to think that you would then be willing to give it back and maybe wait 5 days to get it back again for the next job. I think that's the real world.
If we look, you're right. And if we look at, so I have to be defensive when introducing something new because it might really not work for one organization. So when we discuss at an organization level introducing this principle, there's a couple of things that we ask for around what does the access request portal that you might have internally look like? Where do your identity access objects reside? And how frequent are the changes that you're used to dealing with when it comes to access right? If it is an organization that requires that 24-hour attestation before you get access rights, and we've all worked in organizations like that, right? I can see you nodding, whereby it's like, okay, day 1 you start, day 2 you figure out the permissions and read the policy, day 3 you apply for it, day 4 you get. You might be laughing, but we've all been there. Then this is not a principle for you. Now, if you have centralized your identity and access management, and especially done a little bit of automation around it, this is easy. The problem then is on the data, because people might say, well, okay, but my data is unstructured and I can't really tie it to specific resources. So you're absolutely right, and I would say it's a function of maturity, and look at how you're doing identity frequency-wise before, as an indicator of engaging in this, with this.
Great. Next question.
So I think it's a great idea. My question is, this seems to parallel very much the zero trust architecture, where the authorization rollback access, RBAC access basically is extended to other time dimension. And in terms of working with an application, I can see this working where you can evaluate how much time I have available to perform that task against the set of data and remove it. But provisioning this manually is never going to fly from my point of view. You will have to have some sort of a automated way of granting me the permission and removing the permission without human interaction.
So agree with your latter statement. On zero trust, So I would say zero trust is something that we all aspire to, especially organizations that have a lot of legacy, some monolithic systems. And this is perhaps a way to get there in terms of protecting systems that you're not ready to put zero trust as an underlying principle for those systems. Example, you have two monolithic systems using legacy protocols that are restricted in terms of authentication, and you don't want to invest additional development time. Simple example. Zero trust would limit you in the context of just admitting that, yes, you need to upgrade them and ultimately update the architecture and start following modern principles, right? And I can see you're nodding. But what you could do there is say, well, if I start using this principle, it means that even if they get into those systems, the level of access in terms of quizzing them is restricted because the data is less. So the risk that I'm taking, theoretically, should be less, right? So if you have zero trust, this would just be an automated provisioning of entitlements that changes over frequency that is less than an hour. This is a piece of cake to implement. Where you don't have zero trust, it gets interesting because it can help you protect further by introducing the time dimension that you just don't have.
Thank you. We're going to take...
There's a follow-up.
Oh.
So this will be then similar to, in the current architecture, obviously, is the old castle, and I'm the knight, and I'm showing up at the drawbridge, and I either get access to the entire castle, which is what pretty much happens today, or to a specific area in the castle for a limited period of time. So the analogy that I'm drawing in here is that you have to evaluate that when I'm at the basically drawbridge at the gate, what you're going to do. So with the legacy system, limiting some of the access to the data, I see that very difficult without upgrading the application.
Correct. You would need to have, for legacy, you would need to have the granular entitlements, plus the ability to, as I said, be able to revoke them and invoke them. But legacy has so many other dimensions, right? So maybe that would be a segregated zone altogether already because of you applying zero trust. So I agree there. So perhaps you wouldn't take this hammer to kill that fly because you wouldn't be solving it at an identity layer. But there is overlap as well. No, but thank you. Valid question.
We'll take one from online before we go back to the room. This next is, in your opinion, where should the POC start from? I already see things like just-in-time access and firewall processes implemented for privileged users, and it's quite a daunting task already. So if you have any advice, thank you.
Good question. Teams that have good structure, operational teams that know their data, that's the good starting point. Starting point is also different than how we traditionally engage as cyber and information security professionals. It's a consultation. It's a let's engage and see if this adds value to you. Because the other thing that we have with the principle of need to have available is you're also preventing further accidents on the data. It's not accessible. So operational teams really like that. They take away from it and they say, I can definitely engage with that idea. I have less chance of something going wrong. Where you shouldn't start with is your senior management. Well, you should inform them that you're thinking about this, but not try to restrict their data. With areas that involve innovation teams, research teams, teams that deal with big data, but you should already have some sort of pull mechanism there, right? And overall, when you have those first successes with the well-structured teams, it serves well to help mature some of the other teams. So it's also about helping have a roadmap with the other teams. What I've had back was, Yanis, we're not ready yet, but come back next year because we're going to migrate to this data store, and then we will have the ability to revoke entitlements in a more dynamic way.
Thank you, and we'll take one from the room.
Thank you, Yanis. So I think that just one other quick example where I see this would really work really well would be electronic medical record systems. The 5 rights of medicine stand well in your favor for, it has to be the right charge nurse that's assigned to the patient is the only one that can access the thing, right? But I think that unstructured data, particularly collaboration platforms like Slack and Yammer and probably the king of them all, SharePoint, would be rather difficult since those are relatively distributed access models. Have you thought about, in particular, SharePoint?
So, good question. Thanks for that, Dan. So you have already unstructured data, and timed access to unstructured data is an application of this principle. So if the data is so unstructured and nobody knows it well enough to classify it, use it, codify it, etc., then by default you can assume that you can time box the access required and therefore start restricting that just by knowing it's unstructured. We've actually done that. So you would have your typical SharePoint store that you mentioned, just a normal data store. And access would be given, which would be the legacy result of how we used to work as a team. And that would just be an access right which is revoked by default, but can be easily requested if somebody needs to go back and look at how specific tasks were closed off. So when it comes to unstructured data, we stumbled on this gem, which was, it's just an access right on the unstructured data, which will then help us restrict that. And we offer this principle because it gives us that time-bound dimension.
Any other questions in the room? Okay. We have another one from online. This sounds like RBAC with automation to determine roles for just-in-time access. Is that a valid analogy? And somewhat related to that, would you consider this a human failure or capability failure?
So the first part of the question, yes, you could say this is RBAC with just-in-time. I would say it also has the human dimension, so the consultation, and it will also have, this is not something that you're worried about implementing within a system, but it's if you have that capability, it's something that you want to introduce at a process level, at a people process level, right? So that's very important. Does it relate to capacity? Yes, but it's novel as well. I haven't been able to pigeonhole it. So for the latter part of the question, good question. I wouldn't be able to say it's one or the other. I would say it's a bit of both. And I welcome the views on it.
Thank you. We are finished with the, there we go. Okay, hold on one second. Getting another question from the room.
Thanks. I arrived slightly late, so if you explain this part, forgive me. To me, it kind of almost sounds like a dynamic segregation of duties. We're not saying you can't have A and B together. We're saying you can't have them at the same time. Whereas traditional segregation of duties is you can only have A. You cannot have B. Whereas with this, you would say you can have A by itself, but when you do need B, you get rid of A and now you have B. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I haven't thought about that. So that's really interesting. So you would effectively say segregation towards the complete data versus the smaller ones that I need? Is that what you mean?
I guess more along the lines of I'm going to give up my permissions to this. I'm going to give up my permissions to one set of data in order to perform the other task, but that doesn't imply that I never need the data I gave up. So I would have to give up the other one in order to regain. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I would say just go one step further on that, which is effectively you're checking every certain time slot, perhaps once a week, right? For argument's sake. It might not be that. But let's say you have a developer team, 2-week Scrum cycle, as one example. And you're checking at the end of that 2-week period the segregation, the entitlements, the roles, the permissions. If not required, well, you're looking at what's upcoming, and Scrum Master is one example, right? And then you're granting that. So segregation would be part of that. Segregation duty would be part of that review for the next cycle. And yeah, thank you for highlighting that. I need to go and spend some time on how segregation of duty fits in with these concepts.
That's always the point of segregation of duties is what if I do that? Getting beyond the obvious, you can't be in accounts payable and accounts receivable at the same time.
Yeah.
But there are segregation.
Great, thank you for that. Any other questions? All right, well, everyone put your hands together and thank our speaker today.